Next, let us discuss what stored program control exchange is about, how stored program SPC exchange operates, or what is the idea behind SPC, how all those things we will discuss under this heading, that is SPC. First, let us deal with what is the processor architecture is, what is the processor architecture of SPC is. So in order to obtain adequate security, or in order to adequate security of a switching system, or in order to operate a switching system in a better manner, so we need a minimum of two central processors. So to operate a switching system in a proper manner, we need a minimum of two central processors. So central processor is nothing but a microprocessor or a computer which basically performs, or which basically handles the traffic in an exchange. Of course, we are dealing with SPC exchange. Of course, we said the minimum two central processors are required in operating an SPC exchange. So if two processors are used, each must carry the full traffic load. That means each processor must be able to carry the full traffic load offered to a exchange. If any one of these processors fails, so other processor must be able to handle the traffic. So each must have sufficient processing capacity to do this. That means if one processor fails, the other processor must be able to handle the entire traffic that is applied for an exchange, that is SPC exchange. So the two processors may be configured to operate in the following ways. So basically the two processors are available with SPC exchange. So those two processors can operate in three different configurations. So those are, first one is worker and standby, second one is load sharing, and the other one is synchronous operation. Of course, synchronous operation is sometimes called as synchronous dual operation. First, let us deal with the first configuration of operation, that is worker and standby. So in a system, that is SPC system with a worker and a standby, we are having two types, that is, so those two processors, central processors, operate in two ways, that is cold standby or hot standby. So as we know by this, it is clear that one processor will be working and the other processor will be not operating. So this second processor starts operating if this first processor starts, or if this first processor stop operating. If it fails, the second processor will be operating. So that's why the second processor sometimes called as standby processor. So that's what the idea is. So with respect to this operation of standby processor, we are having two types, that is cold standby and hot standby. Of course, any one of these two may be used in case of SPC exchange. So first let us consider the cold standby. In this cold standby system, the spare processor, that is the second processor, must be switched on and made working, but its memories are not updated. So both processor will be having their own memories. So once the first processor fails, the second processor must continue the operation. But since memory is not updated in the second processor, so there will be disruption of calls. There exists disruption of calls. So whatever the calls that were handled by the first processor, all those calls will be terminated. That is what when changeover take place. So of course, between switching, that is, so all load should be handled by the second operator, that is second processor. So during that switching or data transfer or traffic load transfer from one processor to another processor, so whatever the calls that were handled by first processor, all will be ended. So there is one drawback of cold standby method is. So in the other hand, that is in hot standby, the spare processor is constantly updated, or the second processor will be updating what the first processor is doing right now. Okay, so the second processor will be updating what first processor is doing, or what are the calls that are handled by first processor. All those information will be available with the second processor. The spare processor is be constantly updated with details of all calls. It can therefore assume control without disruption. So if this first processor failed, so then all those calls can be handled by second processor without any disruption. So all calls will be remained in the system, and all those calls will be served by the SPC exchange, because the second processor will be operating. So that is what about that is worker and standby mode of operation. So next let us deal with load sharing. So in case of load sharing, both processors are working independently. So both processor 1 and processor 2 both will be working independently at any time, and they will be performing different tasks for different calls. So if I say 1 Erlang traffic is offered for a SPC exchange, so one processor will be handling 0.5 Erlang traffic, and the another processor may be handling 0.5 Erlang traffic, or traffic handled by both processor may be different. But the thing is, both processors are handling different calls. So both processors are handling different calls. That is what they will be performing different tasks for different calls. So this makes it difficult for the remaining processor to take over when failing of one processor take place. Of course, it becomes very difficult without disruption of traffic. So if both calls are handling different calls and they are performing different tasks, so when one processor fails, it becomes difficult for the other processor to handle all these calls or all the tasks that were performed by the first processor. So there also we will observe disruption of traffic or disruption of calls. So therefore what we made is, so each processor must update the other. So both first processor and second processor must update what other processor is doing, or what other processor is performing, what task this other processor is performing. So both processors should update what the other processor is doing. So if they are updated, then we don't observe any disruption of traffic. So if this processor fails, the other processor can handle those traffic. So the other as well as, so the calls can be set up and cleared down. So load sharing can be extended beyond two processors. Of course, load sharing, an SPC can make use of more than two processors. So that is, load sharing can be extended beyond two processors. Additional processors can be added as traffic grows. We know if traffic is more for an exchange, that is SPC exchange, so we need to make use of more number of processors. So if we are using more number of processors, then those processors or that particular exchange can handle larger amount of traffic. So that results in a multiprocessor configuration. So the next type, that is synchronous, that is next configuration, that is synchronous dual operation, we will discuss. So as the name implies, synchronous dual operation, so both processors are receiving identical inputs and they will be operated in synchronism. So if both processors are fine, working good, so both produce similar type of output, because input given for those processors are same, so they will produce similar output or same output at the same time. And at the output of both sides we do compare those outputs. So comparison of those outputs will be made to check if they are identical. So both outputs are whether they are identical or not. So those checking will be done. So this immediate or this gives immediate fault detection. If one output or if one processor output is different from another processor output, then we can clearly come to know that one of those processor is fault or working wrongly. So that discrepancy can be removed, or we can detect which processor is in fault by running a test program. So we know a test program, we will be knowing what will be the expected output for a test program is. So depending upon by running a test program, we can easily discover or we can easily identify which one is the faulty processor is, which one is the faulty unit is. Of course, the extension of this principle is to use 3 processors instead of using 2 processors. It is with respect to synchronous dual operation, we can make use of 3 processors to be operated. So that is what triplication with majority logic is. So extension of this principle is to use 3 processors with majority decision logic at their outputs as shown in this figure F. So here in this figure F we are using 3 processors. Of course, all these 3 processors are loaded with same data. If all these 3 processors are working fine, all these produce same output. They will produce same output. If they are producing same output, in that scenario it will be 3 by 3, and the majority logic selects any one of these output, or whatever the output produced by all these 3, that is the same output will be given out by the system or by the exchange. If any one of these processor is faulty, if any one of this is working or it is producing wrong output, so in such case it will take, or the output will be produced depending upon out of these 3 which output is in majority. It is, since these 2 are working fine, these 2 outputs will be taken and that will be sent out by the system. That is how majority logic, in such case 2 by 3 scenario will be observed. So that is what majority decision logic is, implemented by the stored program control exchange, SPC exchange. As you can see, if one of the processor fails out of these 3, the majority logic still gives the correct output and the faulty processor is identified as the one which disagreed with the other 2. So if this is faulty, the output of this will not be same as that of these 2. So that particular processor will be removed or replaced by the operator. So in case of large exchanges, the traffic will be large. So a more number of processors are need to be, or so that is in case of large exchange we need more number of processors to handle the large traffic. So either we can make use of multi-computer inside an SPC exchange, or we can make use of multiprocessors, or we can go for multi-computer architecture or multiprocessor architecture can be used. So in the former case, that is when we are using multi-computer architecture, out of many computers, let us consider a computer, and that computer will be having its own memory for processing the data. So if I am having a computer, it will be loaded with some program. Depending upon that program, it operates, the computer operates. Of course, for a large exchange, the load will be divided between those different computers. Between those computers, the load will be divided between those computers on a geographical basis. If we are having one area, that particular area signals or calls will be handled by a particular computer. Similarly, we will be having another area, all those calls coming from those geographical area will be handled by another computer. So in that way, we will be making use of multi-computer architecture inside an SPC exchange. Of course, each handling processing for a different part of the exchange. Each computer will be taking care of different parts of the exchange. So it means different parts means different inside an exchange, different parts are associated with handling different geographical area calls. So in second case, that is multiprocessor architecture. So multiprocessor systems, that is in case of multiprocessor system, the processors will share program and also they share data store. So if I am dealing with multiprocessor, we will be having so many number of processors. All those processors will be controlled by a central processor. So the central processor will be having a data store, some memory where some data will be stored. So that memory will be utilized by all the subprocessors or small processors. That is what multiprocessor system. So it makes use of shared program. Shared program means a particular program will be stored inside this data store. So that particular program will be used by all other multiprocessors. However, each processor can control any part of the exchange using any program. So by making use of that particular program, they can make use of any program they want to use, and also they can control any part of the exchange, handling the calls inside an SPC exchange. Thank you.